My name is Howard Tullman, and I'm the CEO of 1871 in Chicago, which is a mega incubator for startup businesses. 1871 is a startup incubator in Chicago. We have now about 425 companies under one roof. It's astonishing that we were fortunate enough to have a single contiguous space, because that's been a big factor in the way we manage the interconnections and the interactions between our companies. We have at the facility venture capital funds. We have all the major land-grant universities from the state of Illinois present. We have the state present. We have about 6 venture funds. We have about 9 incubators of our own, a number of schools that teach our members coding and design and UI, UX, and how to work in a startup. We have an extensive education program. We do about 1,000 events a year and about 350 workshops. We have roughly 900 mentors, and this year they'll produce about 7,200 hours of one-on-one instruction. We tell our companies that you need to be global, so we have reciprocity arrangements with Mexico City, with Toronto, with Paris, with London, with Tel Aviv, with cities in Brazil, in Colombia, and now in Turkey. And we're continuing to expand on that, but it's mostly a one-directional flow. We mostly want to bring those companies to 1871 in order to be the launch point for their U.S. entry. And then we do a couple of other things. We have a practice around consulting with large firms to bring the startup mindset, the disruptive mindset, the innovation mindset to those big companies. And then we also build our own platforms and technologies that are shared and made available to all of our companies. So we measure outcomes by graduates, except we don't use the word graduates or alumni. We sort of stole that concept because we want it to be a living, perpetual network. We don't want them to sort of leave the community. So we've had about 85 graduates, which is to say companies that have reached a certain size in terms of number of people, or a certain revenue level, or a certain funding stage. So typically, people leave after securing $2 to $5 million worth of Series A financing. It's usually around the requests of their investors, that they have more identity, sort of more of a physical presence. And it works for us as well. I mean, at that point, we'd rather have more companies that are a little earlier in terms of their life. But we do want them, and we do work very hard to have them remain connected because of 3 reasons. One, you don't want to push your successes away and have your entire business revolve around the companies that fail. 2, they're great role models, they're great examples, they're great success stories. And 3, they're prospective employers. And so all of that is part of our ecosystem as well. Well, for me, it's just a way of keeping current. I've been a technologist for 50 years, and I've done a dozen of these and had just about $1 billion worth of exits. I have about 6,000 or 7,000 employees among the companies that are still up and operating. So, but I've been really fortunate to have good management teams, and our custom has been when we sell a business or take it public, we take the second level of management with us to the next business opportunity, and we leave in place people that are running the current business. And we've done that maybe 6 or 7 different times. But what's exciting to me is in industries where we focus, and we don't focus on areas where we don't have specific domain expertise, but to have somebody come to me 30 or 40 years after I've sort of revolutionized an industry, whether it's automobiles or insurance or film or education, whatever it is, and do it again with new technology and with different ideas, is very exciting, because I really think that it's a rare opportunity to help them not make the same mistakes. They'll make their own mistakes, and we get that they'll make mistakes, but to help them be more effective and to maybe just move the needle a little bit higher on the success curve, if we can save them from making all the mistakes that we've already made. every entrepreneur would tell you that the highs are nowhere near as deep as the lows, and that the learning all comes from failure. But the thing that we spend a great deal of time on with the entrepreneurs are two other considerations. One is what I call in-game amnesia, and that means that the minute you start focusing backwards on the last call, the last mistake, the last problem, you are likely to mess up the next opportunity. And so every great athlete will tell you that that's what they do. They have to put it out of their mind. They learn from it, but then they move on. And two, we are completely intolerant of excuses, because we think that when you look for an excuse, you're giving up your ability to change and to make change happen. And so we don't play the blame game at all. We think that blame is really not a healthy concept. And we understand that sometimes circumstances are beyond your control, but our job is to manage those circumstances. Number one is, I always start with the concept of the need to tell a simple story. And these are all life lessons, by the way. These are not related solely to startups. But when I say tell a simple story, what I mean by that is, who are we, what are we doing, and why? This is what people need to know. People don't work today for a business, they work for people. And they need to believe in something and be a part of something that's bigger than themselves and that's important to them, and it's going to make a difference. So the story is critical, and the simpler the story, the easier it is to repetitively communicate it over and over again. So number one, tell a simple story. Number two is keep raising the bar. There's just no question that you have to master the science of iteration. You have to constantly cannibalize yourself. You have to constantly say who's doing it better, who's doing it differently. One of the things we've done is revise the classic definition of insanity. The classic definition of insanity used to be, why would you expect a different result if you kept doing things the same way? What we've said to our entrepreneurs is something slightly different, which is, don't measure yourself simply by the competitive set, because that binds you by their limitations. You need to think outside of that as to what's possible, not what's been done to date, because that's not a good measure of what the spectrum is of opportunity. So number two is to keep raising the bar. Number three is, to start with what you have. There's a tremendous inertia associated with planning. And planning, excessive planning is sort of a symptom of decay, and elaboration of detail is sort of like pollution, in my view. You start with what you have. You understand that things will get better over time. You can make them better, but you know that if you don't get started, then you're never going to be successful. And that's the idea of the screenplay and all those things that enter into this idea of get it started, and then for sure it'll change, but if you don't get it started, it'll never happen. The next idea is not to sell yourself short. And so we express this by saying feasibility will compromise you soon enough. And what does that mean? That means if I'm already talking myself out of what are possibilities, then I'm not going to reach the heights that I should be able to reach. Michael Jordan, used to say you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And we're very committed to that idea that let other people tell you why you can't do it. You shouldn't do that. You should always ask for the best seat in the restaurant, right? You may not get it, but if you don't ask for it, for sure you won't get it, and there's no reason to think that you're not as entitled to it as anybody else might be. The next one is to make room for people. We find that we want talented people. We want people who are super creative. They're a package deal. Some of them don't believe in showering. Some of them want to work all night. And you have to be and run interference for those people if you want to build a company. And also, you have to understand that not everybody, including people who can make a very substantial contribution to your business, not everyone is a religious zealot like you, the entrepreneur. And so some people just want a job. And frankly, this is a great thing that we learned from Willie Sutton. Willie Sutton was the bank robber, and When they asked him why he robbed banks, he said, because that's where the money is. But his second quote was equally important, and this is critical in startups. Because startups begin with this fantasy that it's a kumbaya world and everybody should love everybody and it's a family and we'll all be together in the garage forever and we'll all own 25% of the business. What he said was, it's not important that the team love each other. It's just important that they each do their job and do it as well as they can. And you see that because the largest single failing of startups is in sales. And the largest reason is because the sales manager really is not encouraged to be the asshole that he needs to be. And that's because he would like to be welcome at the Friday's TGIF. But if he's doing his job, he's firing 10% of the sales force every month. And that doesn't make you popular at the beer blast on Friday afternoons. And so that's a very significant consideration. It's that there are going to be people with different responsibilities and not everything will always be hunky-dory. We mentioned, failure. I don't think failure is honorable. I don't think it's great. I think it's necessary. Our job with failure is to recognize it, to learn from it, to put it behind you, to not repeat it, and also to understand that some failures are one-off failures, but when things repeat themselves, they're systemic failures. They're not mistakes. They're not sort of random things. And so we spend a lot of time looking at if something is happening consistently that's wrong, it's probably not an accident. It's probably something that we haven't thought through long enough to be successful. And so that's something that we focus on as well around this issue of mistakes. And then I think the last thing is that you can't really add value if you don't have values. And so I think that values are mutable, and this is something that's very hard for big companies to understand. Big companies, have a mission statement that you could buy at Walgreens and have it laminated, and it's fairness and diversity. And, in the meantime, a startup is focused on survival. And so the virtues of a startup and the values that you have to live every day are much more down to earth. They have to do with execution. They have to do with integrity. They have to do with things like, failing fast, as you mentioned before. But the real key is in the world of disruptive innovation, it's even worse. It's that you can't talk about diversity. You can't talk about serving 12 different masters. The job is really to keep the business going, to build the business, to seize the opportunities, to get the product out there. And that whole culture, that sort of ready, fire, aim culture is really, really significant to the success of businesses. And so those are the steps. Those are the basic things. We think it's a business that has a lot to do with perseverance, with perspiration, certainly with passion. A lot around preparation. We believe in free speech, but we've outlawed the phrase "I don't know," because in the old days, "I don't know" meant you were ignorant. Today, it means you're lazy, because it means you haven't used the tools that are available to know just about anything. And so now we take it as an insult. If somebody comes in and says, "I don't know," it means they didn't do their homework, they didn't prepare. They didn't spend the time to do me the courtesy of not wasting my time. And so I don't know is something we don't like to hear. We like people to do the research, use the tools that are available. And the last thought is that we no longer believe, and this is really a significant consideration, we no longer believe that we're obliged to evaluate either or equations. And when you build a lot of space, and I've built hundreds of thousands of square feet of space over the last decade, the contractors always come and say you can have it on time, on budget, or really straight. And we always say we don't have to make those choices because we want all three. And today, because the cost of technology is reduced, because the cost of capital is modest, you don't have to make those bad choices. And so when somebody comes to me these days and says, "I'm compromising what I'm doing a halfway job, or I can only do X," we say that that's not a failure of resources, that's a failure of creativity. It means they haven't thought hard enough. They haven't done their homework. They haven't focused in on what's really important to the business. And when they do that, we discover that they don't have to make these bad choices. The way I would conclude is to say something that I think is the singly most important thing that I take away every day. You ask me about why do I do this? I think the greatest privilege that you can have is to understand that it's never about big cars. It's not about making a lot of money. We spend a lot of our waking hours working, and the greatest privilege that you can have is to get up every day and go do something that you can be enthusiastic about, that's important and that's going to make a difference beyond you, but that's something that you're excited about. And so that's what I would wish for everybody. That's what we try in our business. And sometimes we say to people that if they can't be excited about what they're doing, then it's not right for them, and that's perfectly fine. But we want people who are excited about the fact that we're changing the future, and that's a pretty sacred obligation, and that's a thing that keeps you up at night, but it also gets you up in the morning.